After almost completing the comeback in an exciting battle versus Aston Villa, Chelsea go again this weekend in a game that could very well decide whether we get Europe or not next season against one of our London rivals. Lads, lasses and the rest of the masses, welcome to the lead-in. Let's set the scene here. It's Chelsea versus Tottenham Hotspur, 9th in the Premier League versus 5th. After drawing to Villa, the chances of us gaining multiple places in the table has lessened, but a win here would catapult us above West Ham into 8th place, just 3 points behind 6th placed Manchester United. It's very important that we get something from this game, and hopefully that something is all 3 points. So, we need to get past Tottenham Hotspur first in order to do that, a team that has been flying so far this season, but just suffered an aggravating loss to their North London rivals, Arsenal. They currently are in a bit of patchy form, 2 wins, 2 losses and a draw. The last time these two sides faced it was an absolute barn burner, a 4-1 win to the Blues after Spurs went down to 9 men, with Christian Romero and Destiny Udogie seeing red. They'll be looking to rectify that loss against us, so let's take a quick look at the potential Tottenham team and see what they could be bringing to the table. Firstly, let's talk absentees. Spurs have a few long-term injury concerns, with Destiny Udogie, Fraser Forster, Ryan Sessegnon and Manus Solomon all confirmed to be out for this one. Oliver Skipp has a small knock but may make the bench, and former Blue Timo Werner will most likely miss out due to a hamstring problem he suffered versus Arsenal. I'll be putting Ange Postecoglou's side into his standard 4-2-3-1 formation for this fixture, with the team slightly rotated because of the above injuries. First up in goal though is going to be the impressive Italian Vicario as always. With Forster out, there's zero chance he doesn't play. The defence is going to be the exact same back four that started versus the Gunners in that game, with Spaniard Pedro Porro on the right, Christian Romero and speedster Mickey van der Ven as the centre-back pairing, and Ben Davies filling in at left-back once more. Moving into the midfield, we'll start with the deeper roles. I think there'll be wholesale changes here. After his own goal, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg will drop out for Yves Bissouma, and next to him I will be giving a return to the side for Pape Sarr. The 3 advanced of them will be slightly altered, but starting on the right I'd expect Dejan Kulusevski to retain his place. In the middle will be James Maddison as always, and the left side will change with Werner's exclusion. This could be Brennan Johnson, but I'd expect Son Heung-min to drop into this role instead. That leaves the one man up top, and I reckon Richarlison will come back into the side, giving Spurs a focal point to target with a Brazilian leading the line. As I said, just a brief overview of what I expect their team to look like. There could be more rotation in the side, but I don't expect too much to happen in truth. Now let's quickly take a look at how Chelsea could line up. We still have a mountain of absentees, with a lot of first teamers still out. There are returns on the horizon, but I wouldn't expect to see them in this game. I think that we'll continue to use the 4-2-3-1 as ever, but this could change in game, which I'll talk about a little later. As ever, I'll be showing what I expect from Poch, then suggest changes that I personally would like to see. Starting with the goalkeeper, I'm going to be putting in Georgia Petrovic as ever. Sanchez is still injured, so there's no reason for Petro to be dropped from the lineup. The back four is going to be changed from the Villa game. Malo Gusto is still out injured, so filling in this role once again will be Trevor Chalobah. The centre-back partnership next to him will be slightly changed. Chelsea legend Thiago Silva, who recently announced his departure from the club at the end of the season, limped off the pitch with a groin injury versus Villa, and thus will be replaced by Axel Disasi. Next to him will be fellow Frenchman Benoit Badiashile, who looked much improved in the previous game. Moving to the left, it's going to be Marc Cucurella. He's been mightily impressive in the last few games, and with him possibly being the linchpin in a new system for the Blues, I would expect him to start over Ben Chilwell. Moving into the middle, we'll start with the holding roles. Enzo Fernandez successfully had surgery for his hernia issues and will be recovering for the rest of the season. Instead, Conor Gallagher will take his place, alongside Moises Caicedo, who was player of the match last time out. Ahead of them in the attacking midfield roles, let's start on the right. It's going to once again be Noni Madueke. A goal and an assist for him in the Villa game, he 100% deserves the chance to impress again, so let's just hope it comes sooner this time. In the centre, Chelsea's likely player of the season, Cole Palmer, will operate here once more, and over on the left will be Misha Mudryk, who, despite not having a great game versus Villa, might be better off here versus the high line that Spurs like to employ. The same could be said for the man up top, which will of course be Nicholas Jackson. He's admitted that he thinks he should have done better with chances recently. Let's hope he can get back into goal scoring form versus the team he scored a hat-trick against earlier in the season. This is what I am expecting, but what would I personally change? Let's start with the back line. I have reservations about Disasi and Badiashile partnering each other, so an alternative could be to shift Chalobah to centre-back and deploy Alfie Gilchrist at right-back instead. With how this team might operate, I think that position would be better for Gilchrist, as he's not really taken to this team by storm as of yet. Moving into midfield, let's take a look at the attacking line. Personally, I think Mudryk could sit this one out considering how poor he was. Sterling is being assessed for this match, so could be a like-for-like replacement, but another option is shifting Madueke to that side, pushing Palmer to his usual right wing position, and then playing Cesare Casadei as the central 10. We saw him come on for a short cameo last time out, but with how Poch refuses to use the youth, I doubt this ever happens. Apart from that, I think this is the strongest team we can field with all our injuries. A few other players are close to return, such as Levi Colwill and Christopher Nkunku, but I think we'd be very lucky to see them in this one. So those are my lineups, and I'd like to hear from you guys too. So for today's question of the day, answer me this. Do you expect Poch to stick with the system from the second half versus Villa or not, and why? Let me know in the comments down below with QOTD at the start as always, and I'll pin my favourite answer. Let's talk about that system because I believe it could make a return here considering the positive reception it got, and I personally believe it's our best chance of winning this game. To understand it though, we must first look at the old system and the problems we ran into in the first half versus Villa. This is how we started the game versus Aston Villa, a pretty standard 4-2-3-1. So what's exactly the issue here? Personally, I think it's out in these wide areas, and specifically in this really wide channel out near the touchline on both sides. A lot of our play, when we play through pressure, ends up with us playing the ball into this area, whether this is Palmer playing here, or Gallagher, or Mudryk who sometimes played here, it usually ends up over here, and that's because a lot of the time, again, under pressure, we usually play like this kind of system where we go in through Caicedo, and then it comes out here as we play through the pressure, and then Palmer can turn and play it out wide, or play it through to Jackson, that type of thing. Also, on the transition, a lot of the time Jackson will drop deep to collect the ball, and then he will do the same thing, he will turn and try and drive, or just go to one of the wingers. Now what this does is, because the two players and the kind of hub where we kind of end up with the ball is so central, like here with Palmer, is that it attracts our two wingers, Mudryk and Madueke, a little bit closer to the central areas where they don't really want to be, and what this does is it opens up this massive space that is just not utilised. Usually for teams this would not be much of an issue, you just put your fullbacks here and they occupy the space and can make the overlapping runs and give the fullback something to think about. But in this Chelsea team, and in this specific team that we've laid out, it doesn't really work. Trevor Chalobah, for example, is a centre-back by trade. He's never going to get up into these positions and then make these overlapping runs around the outside and then put balls into the box. That's not the type of player he is. Instead, he'll kind of stay back here, play 1-2s with Madueke, or sometimes go back to Caicedo, those types of things, and let Madueke be the one to make these runs around the outside and then put balls into the box. He doesn't ever commit himself and make those overlaps himself. Likewise, on the opposite side, we have Cucurella, who can make these overlapping runs and does sometimes, but a lot of the time he doesn't really do that. A lot of the time he kind of operates this option, plays it back to Mudryk and lets Mudryk drive inside, and that's kind of the way he operates. He kind of holds the width here and lets Mudryk go here, and we don't really get a committal onto this one fullback out here. We do not make that 2v1. The problem that this creates is that against narrow back fours like Villa played, when they drop deep into their box and play these narrow back fours, is that the fullbacks can just mark man for man on our wingers, and it doesn't really help us break through their team, because we don't really have the option, they don't really have the threat of the outside channel to think about. They can kind of just stay here and mark these two, and they aren't very much of a threat 1v1. But that changes when the system changes in the second half. I mentioned before that Cucurella is the linchpin that this new system is built off of, and that's because he is the man that inverts into the midfield and helps us create this 3 at the back system that fixes a lot of the issues that this team was facing. If I put the players into the positions that they're actually playing in the game, with Cucurella in this inverted midfield role, you see that Cole Palmer and Conor Gallagher occupy almost these inside 10 positions in the half spaces, and creates this kind of box midfield. It's not really a box midfield, but it kind of is in the way that it looks. And what this does is, because Palmer and Gallagher are now occupying the central area, Madueke and Mudryk no longer need to be as close to the centre of the pitch as they have been, so they can push out wide and still maintain that kind of connection into the midfield. You'll notice now that we are in a similar formation to the one that we saw in pre-season that Poch used very well and we were very successful with, and that's that 3-2-5 system. But it's slightly different to that because we obviously didn't have an inverted fullback, so it is slightly different shape in defensive scenarios, but apart from that, the attacking scenario is very similar to that setup that we were using before. With Madueke and Mudryk now out wide, it forces the defence's hand. The left back and the right back can't just stay here, or Madueke and Mudryk will just go around the outside and get easy crosses into the box, which you want to avoid at all costs, so they have to come out here to meet them, and what that does is it stretches the spaces in between the opposition. This opens up passing lanes for Palmer if he wants to play it into here, and for runs for Madueke, or if he wants to actually make the run himself and push really high up. It causes this indecision between the defenders now, that the fullback has to stay with Madueke, but if he comes here to mark Palmer, now Madueke has got all of this free space. Obviously he's not going to do that, and he will come over here and mark Madueke instead, and the centre back will have to do this job, or a midfielder, and what that does is it opens up this central space here for Madueke to drive into, and then as we saw, bend one into the far corner. Obviously in that instance it was not actually Palmer here, I believe it was Gallagher who had overloaded onto this side, but the premise is still there. This actually helps us out defensively too. With these 5 players pushed up really high with our high press, high pressure style, it pens the defenders back into this box and makes it very difficult for them to play out from the back. More often than not, they'll just turn the ball over, and that's where we thrive, really. We are a transitional-based team full of running, and that's kind of how Poch has set us up, and it really benefits us when we have players like Conor Gallagher, Cole Palmer, even Cucurella in this midfield, who are very high press, high aggression-based players that will like to intercept passes and push us on the counter-attack. I want to focus specifically on Cucurella as well, because it's that aggressive side of him that really suits him in this inverted role, and obviously he's the kind of question mark player in this system because he's not a centre mid, but what he does is gives us that presence and that aggression in the midfield, as I mentioned before, and it also helps Caicedo because he doesn't have as much defensive responsibility as he does when he has Enzo in the side. Obviously when Enzo plays, he is not as quick going backwards. Cucurella is not particularly the best player going backwards, he likes going forward and stepping on the front foot, and this kind of system helps him do that in a way, but Enzo is even worse at going backwards at times. He is not the fastest player, and Caicedo usually has to do both defensive jobs for him. In this system, he doesn't really have to do that as much, and it kind of showed that Caicedo had one of his best matches for us in that game. This also helps players like Thiago Silva too, who is much more of an anticipation player rather than a reactive one in my opinion. We see a lot of the time when a ball will be fizzed into the striker or the central cam or something like that, and Silva will be the player to step into that midfield and try and get the ball. A lot of the time when Thiago Silva does this in a 4 at the back system, it doesn't really work very well because Chalobah obviously isn't there, there's this massive space that is left when Thiago Silva does push up, and this has led to a lot of errors that led to goals this season from Thiago Silva. We've seen this multiple times where he steps into this area, misses the ball gets played behind him to an ongoing striker, who will then stick it into the back of the net 1v1 versus the goalkeeper. In this 3 at the back system though, because Chalobah is here, you have this added net of an extra player here, so if the ball does go behind, Chalobah can cross over and intercept that, or Badiashile can do it with it regardless of wherever side it is. He has the added benefit of having 2 centre-backs behind him, so he can be a bit more risky and step into the midfield. Obviously in a 4 at the back system he can't do that as easily. And speaking of Chalobah and Badiashile, I think these two have benefited from this system massively as well. Chalobah, obviously we know, is a great right centre-back. We saw it under Thomas Tuchel that he was used there, and this is, I think, his best position is as a right centre-back in a 3 at the back system. Likewise, Badiashile we saw had a very comfortable game against Villa that we weren't expecting because he hasn't been very good this season, admittedly, but he seems much better now having the extra bodies behind him or next to him, and I felt like he kind of got reassured by having those extra players near him, and he wasn't as shaky on the ball and had one of his best performances. This also helps out Petrovic because Petrovic again doesn't have the greatest long distribution, but his short distribution is very calm and he's very good at passing it out short from the back. Having these extra options, because he has the extra centre-back here, makes it much easier for us to play out from the back and then make those transitional opportunities like I mentioned earlier. Overall, I think this system just suits our team more, and despite the rotation that we will see, because obviously Thiago Silva will not be playing here, I think we should still be able to use this against Spurs. I think that they set up in a very similar way to us with the high pressure, but I think that if we can pen them back into their box like we did with Villa, I think we'll be very successful using this system. Whether or not Poch actually decides to use this system is another question, and we'll just have to see come match day. For a score prediction, I'm going to be predicting a draw between the two clubs. I think that Chelsea aren't consistent enough to win this game, but for some reason I have a sneaky suspicion that we'll get a few goals in this one, in an exciting back and forth match. I'll be predicting a 2-2 scoreline, with Jackson and Palmer getting the goals for the Blues, and Kulusevski and Son on the score sheet for our opponents. We'll have to wait until the game to see if any of my predictions are correct, and as always, I'll be live streaming after the game to give my first reactions. But if you can't wait until then, YouTube reckons you'll enjoy one of these two videos on screen in the meantime. Thank you guys so much for watching as ever, and remember, in the rain or in the dry, keep that blue flag flying high. Come on, you Blues!